Okay, on to axis. Part of level 2, let's focus on this diagram over here. Normal axis, minus 30 to 90. Left axis deviation, minus 30 to minus 90. Right axis deviation, 90 to 180 degrees. And then indeterminate axis is over here in this range. Like I mentioned before, things that can cause left axis deviation would be left ventricular hypertrophy and lateral infarct. And things that would cause right axis deviation are things that affect the right ventricle, for example, right ventricular hypertrophy, things that make the right ventricle enlarged, like an ASD, and other items. Let's look at some examples. So we're going to determine the axis with the thumbs up method that I mentioned in the first video. So let's look at lead 1 first. We've got a thumb up because it goes up. And then let's look at F over here, and it's a thumb down. So F is positive when it goes down. So, and since it's negative, that means the axis is in this half of the circle. And lead 1 is positive going this way, and it's positive. So the axis is in this half of the circle. And if you put those two together, you end up with the axis being in this quadrant here of the circle. And remember, it's normal from minus 30 to 0 degrees from up here. This part is normal. So we've got to figure out if the axis is in this part here or is it in this part here. And the way you do that is with lead 2. So the 3 leads you're really using for the thumbs up method are 1, F, and then lead 2. So we need to figure out if we're in this section here. And lead 2 runs like this. That's at 60 degrees. So it turns out that's perpendicular to minus 30. You can look over here at this little diagram. So if lead 2 is positive, that would mean it's on this side. And if it's negative, it would be on this side. So it turns out that lead 2 is the tiebreaker or whatever. It's the thing that's going to determine if this is on this side of minus 30 or on this side. If lead 2 is positive, then you've got a normal axis. If it's negative, you've got left axis deviation. So we're going to count up the positive and negative deflections and decide if overall lead 2 is positive or negative. And it's just a little bit negative because there are 5 little boxes here and 4 here. So the net for that is negative 4 minus 5 is negative 1. Since that's negative, that means the axis is this way, just slightly more negative than minus 30. So something like minus 35 degrees. And you could just call that left axis deviation. The other way to do the axis is the isoelectric lead, which I mentioned briefly in the first video. And what that means is if you've got a lead that's isoelectric, meaning it's neither positive or negative, so the up and the down are the same, then that means the axis is perpendicular to that lead. And you can look at the limb leads and see which one is most isoelectric and then estimate where your axis is. So lead 1 here, that's definitely not isoelectric. This is pretty close to isoelectric. This is not. This isn't, this isn't, this isn't. So in this example, lead 2 is our most isoelectric lead. So the axis should be perpendicular to lead 2. I'm showing that over here. So lead 2 is here at 60 degrees. Perpendicular would be either this way or this way. Either of those could be perpendicular. So when you do the isoelectric lead method, you have to decide which way does it go, this way or that way. And that's not hard to figure out because if it goes in this direction, then lead 1 will be positive. If it goes in this direction, then lead 1 will be negative. So all we need to do is look at lead 1 and we see it's positive. So we know we're talking about this one right here, perpendicular to lead 2. And in the positive and AV1 direction. And then you can further refine it by asking yourself, okay, is the isoelectric lead slightly positive or slightly negative? And that'll tell you which way to go with it. And like I mentioned before, it's a little bit negative. It's minus 5. 4 minus 5 equals -1, so it's slightly negative, which means the actual axis will be slightly in the opposite direction of what's defined as positive. This is positive for lead 2, so it's going to be slightly negative right there. And again, we got -35 or so by the two different methods. Let's do another example.